I am back here once again on behalf of Renew Chicago. And today we're going to talk about two wonderful partners that Renew Chicago gets to work with, Kevin Taylor, Ruth Gossell, You Are Chicago Alliance. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Hey, Kevin, I'm going to start off with you as well, too. For those who do not know much about You Are Chicago Alliance, tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. You Are Chicago Alliance, I feel, is a godsend to our city, to our world, especially the inner city of Chicago. You Are Chicago is a workforce development community, gospel-based, and our mission is to mobilize the local church, businesses, and nonprofits in the community to help provide living wage jobs or opportunities for the leaders, program participants that go through our program in a Christ-centered community. And so it's really, really, I think, the answer for some of the violence and the poverty that we see in Chicago.
Now, Kevin, how did you get involved with it? Did you start You Are Chicago Alliance, or are you hired as the executive director?
Sure, yeah. So I was hired as the executive director for You Are Chicago. I've been doing this kind of ministry. Just to give a little bit backdrop on my story. Born and raised in Cabrini Green, so the housing projects of Chicago, one of the most notorious, violence, poverty, all those things. Right now, where Park Community and a lot of other places sit, and I came to faith early at 13. I was mentored. I had a Christian mentor who came into our community and took the time to invest in guys from the projects. And so I was encouraged at a young age. I came to faith, encouraged to go to school, get my degree and all those things. But one of the things I was taught was to never forget where you come from and always give back. And so I think I've been in this space for a long time, partnering with Park Community Church, a number of other churches. So You Are Chicago essentially birthed out of churches from the North Shore, Willow Creek North Shore, the Vineyard in Evanston, and so a number of nonprofits and small organizations coming together to figure out what do we do about the violence and poverty in Chicago. The North Shore was like, we've been blessed to have resources, but we see the violence and the poverty in Chicago. We want to do something. So the church mobilized kind of a group, if you will, founding group, to try and figure out what would be the best solution coming into the city and helping. And overwhelmingly, with tapping into stakeholders, the idea was that you have to provide resources. You have to provide some type of income for the guys on the block or people who are struggling, because usually that's how you pull people out of poverty. So I was brought in on the back end of kind of fleshing out what it would look like to start a jobs program, a faith-based jobs program. And then after hearing all the people at the table, I was like, man, I would love to throw my head in the ring to actually lead this. This is my background.
You got it. Hey, now, Ruth Gossell, you and I met a couple of years ago when I worked with Dr. Easley, and you were a student at Moody Bible Institute. And then from that point, you worked as a teacher at Daystar for a number of years. And how did you get involved with You Are Chicago, and what made you decide to get involved?
Yes, I actually, when I was a student at Moody, I went to a church called Living Faith Community Church, and it was in Cabrini Green. So I met Kevin and his wife Tegas, and so we just formed, a friendship through, going to church. And so I've always, loved and supported, Kevin's and Tegas, both of them, their heart for just like mentoring, looking out for, the younger generation, and just trying to help them out as much as they can, just living life alongside them. And so I've been involved in a lot of the kids' lives that actually Kevin's wife Tegas was involved in when they were younger. And so like our paths just continue to cross, and we continue to connect with each other and, support each other in whatever, God's doing in our lives at the point where we are. And so through that, when, Kevin had mentioned like, hey, I really want to, do a food drive for Cabrini during COVID. And I'm like, really? Because God was laying that on my heart too. I was already taking a couple, grocery bags to different families and stuff. And so through that, it just seemed like God was like just bringing it all together. So Kevin and I, so I partnered up with UR Chicago to do the food drive with Park. So yeah.
Very, very good. And so for you you and I chatted, you were a teacher for a number of years. How have you used some of those skills as a teacher and applied it with what you're doing in your volunteer role with UR Chicago?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of teaching is, you go into the classroom and you observe where students are and try to meet them where they are and bring them to, kind of like where you want them to be, and provide the different resources that they need to get them where they need to be. And so with that is, also just building a relationship with them and showing them that, you as an adult can be trusted, and that you can, love them and pour into their life too. And so just a lot of the skills of, as a teacher, just leading people and just showing them how much you care, and also pouring, hope into them. Because, I mean, as you know, the best teachers are ones that inspire you to be your best self. And so just kind of stepping into these, either kids or even, the older generation, and saying, hey, I see you, I know you, and I believe that you can do something with your life. And so I really love, UR Chicago's vision and passion of, showing, hey, you know what, don't just accept a minimum wage job, but accept like a living wage job and stuff. And with the food drive, it's just kind of like, hey, we see that you might be struggling right now with COVID. And so we want to like just reach out and minister to you right now.
Got it. Now, Kevin, I've lived in Chicago for 43 years, lived here all my life, but primarily on the south side. I could tell you about Bridgeport. I could tell you about South Loop. Tell me about Cabrini Green, the neighborhood that you grew up in.
Yeah, wow. Cabrini Green, where do we start? So coming up in the community, right, I was just thinking about our story, right, my history. I was born in Cabrini. So, some people say I look pretty young, but I've been around the block a few times. And so doing ministry in Cabrini Green for over 30 years, there's been some highs and some very, very lows. So as you know, Cabrini Green is a shell of what it was. When I was growing up, Cabrini was the most amazing community you could grow up in. And the reason why was because of proximity, right? You had a lot of people that you grew up with, doing life with. You could go down the street, down the porch and knock on the door and ask the neighbors for, out of small towns, right? You can ask them for a cup of sugar, give me some milk until we get paid, or can you watch my children and then I'll watch your children next week, right? There was a community unlike nothing I ever experienced before. And so growing up, I learned that families, multi-generational families is where it is, right? I know you probably can attest to that, where you got grandmother, you got mama, you got, and folks are just staying at home and living life and saving money and kind of doing the whole thing. So Cabrini in itself was like a city within a city before the drugs, before the violence kind of took hold, and that's a long story in itself. For those of you who know the violence of Cabrini Green and the city of Chicago in general, it has a lot to do with folks not having the opportunity or access to jobs and figuring out the drug life is the best way I can provide for my family. And so we go through that whole process of Cabrini being a great place where there's family to drugs, the introduction of drugs, the gang formulation, and then the exodus of jobs, businesses from the community, and then folks, when they get on their feet, they will leave the community. And so what you had essentially in Cabrini was a place where violence had a really, really great opportunity to foster. But in that, there were still amazing lives of people who have gifts and abilities that just kind of fell through the cracks. And And so right now, today, you still have a remnant people from Cabrini. You got a lot of folks that historically go to church. Some of the older generation, just really trying to figure out how they can navigate what is life now when, most of the projects are torn down and folks are displaced. But Cabrini Green, if you had to sum it up in a few words, they're folks that are resilient. They're a resilient bunch of folks, right? And I can attest to that. I was the first person, like I said, to in my family to graduate college, right, to come back to the community and provide job opportunities for some of those guys who felt like there were no opportunities, right? And I think Cabrini Green is a symbol of Chicago, of a bigger issue happening in the world. But I love my hometown. I love where I'm from. I celebrate it much. I am not ashamed to say where I come from because I know there's a lot of great and powerful people who come from Cabrini. There's a lot of great thinkers in Cabrini, and it's essentially like the rest of the world. There are areas where there are a lot of amazing people with gifts and abilities and talents endowed by the Lord himself. And sometimes we forget about that with the violence and all that's happening in certain communities.
Got it. Hey, Kevin, for those who may not be familiar, what is the boundaries of Cabrini Green? What makes up Cabrini Green?
Sure. So that's a shifting thing now, but historically, Cabrini Green has always been, so on the west, we would go all the way up to Halsted, right? So Halsted Street would be the boundary on the west. On the east, sometimes most folks would say Orleans, but there are some people that were even a little further, all the way down to Wales, right? So, and then on your north, you would have North Avenue, because even though Cabrini ended on kind of division-ish, if you will, in Clybourne, there were folks that lived in Marshallfield Gardens, which is technically not Cabrini Green, but when you come up in the community, that's considered Cabrini Green. And then on your south, you would have Chicago Avenue. So those were kind of the radius of what unofficial Cabrini Green community would look like.
Got it. Hey, Ruth, I mean, you talked about your early days at Moody when you volunteered at Cabrini Green. Was it through your PCMs?
No, it was just volunteer through a Big Brother, Big Sister program.
Got it. Compare Cabrini back then when you were a student to now. How has it changed?
Well, when I was a student, I used to go up in the 9/11 Hudson building, which was one of the red buildings. And also, I go over to the Burling building, which was like a big, huge white building where actually Target is now, where that field is and everything. And so back then, when you walked over in the community, I mean, there were people around everywhere. Actually, when I would walk up to the door of the red building, I mean, they always had people on the lookout down below and stuff. And so when I would walk up, they were so used to having Moody students come over that they would scream out Moody Bible. And so it would give everybody time to put their drugs, put their money away and stuff. So we could walk through, safely. And so it was just an environment that was, it had a lot more people and it had a lot more, drug activity and things like that going on when I first moved to Chicago. But soon after I was in Cabrini, I just started seeing the buildings being demolished, and just people would be like, hey, I'm living here now, but then they're like, I have to move out by next week. And so I just saw, week by week, I never knew what Cabrini was going to look like, because within a week, they would demolish a whole big high rise. And it would just be all rubble. And then within 2-3 weeks, then they had grass planted there as if nothing ever happened. And so Cabrini has changed so much since then. I mean, now there's a big, huge field where the 9/11 Hudson building and 3 other buildings, there are 4 buildings in that area. And now it's a big grassy area where people play soccer. Yeah. And it's nobody knows that, hey, there are 4 massive size buildings here with, thousands of people. And now they think, oh, it's just a vacant lot.
Wow. Okay. Hey, Kevin, talk to me about your role with UR Chicago, and then at least I also know you're involved with Park Community Church. I know Renew. What hats do you wear? Love for people to get to know you as a person.
So I'm primarily executive director for UR Chicago Alliance, which is the faith-based program, and that's one of my main jobs. My main jobs and passions is because I'm from Cabrini, right? And I know that there are so many people who have gifts, abilities, and skills that are looking for opportunities. They just feel like those opportunities are so distant or far away from them that they aren't for them. And so one of my main jobs is trying to go into communities that struggle with placement into living wage jobs, and then build relationships and kind of help folks become stable and provide for their families and become the community philanthropists that God has called them to be, to give back, not only financially, but spiritually or volunteering and being a leader in the community. So with UR Chicago, we're doing a lot of that. And we're in Rogers Park, but we've done some cohorts in Cabrini Green with Park Community. Park has been so generous to allow us to have space to actually do cohorts in the near north location. And so that's an amazing thing. I also help lead the North Rogers Park campus of Park Community Church. So Park Community Church, as most folks know, have multiple locations. They're not even locations now, but multiple families, right, or churches. And so I myself, James Crockett and Scott Parker, kind of lead the North Rogers Park campus. And the reason why I love that role that I do is because it's so similar to what I grew up in. North Rogers Park on Howard, they call it the jungle, right? And so on Howard and Paulina in that area, that's where Park Community Church branched out another location or church from South Rogers Park with Jason Lalone and all those leaders over there. And so we run that service there. We do a lot of outreach. We know from our background that the only way you're going to engage and make an impact in the community is you go in deep, you build relationships like Ruth was saying. It's relational, it's super relational. And then once you know people's story, you can't forget it, right? You can't unhear their stories and what God has taken them through. And so then we jump in to do that. I also help with facilities at near North Park Community Church. So at the main campus, I'm there to help kind of help people figure out what rooms they need to go to, set up, tear downs, all those things as well. Just trying to stay connected in Cabrini as a thank you, but also as a blessing to me and my family, but as a thank you to Park and the service in which I see them moving towards to help our Cabrini residents, right? My heart is Cabrini. I've lost over 500 people in Cabrini to violence, to murder, to senseless. We buried so many of them, right? And so as a love to my church, I service that way. And I see Park beginning to step up and be more intentional with mobilizing our community, our church, the congregation, to how do you get involved in cross-cultural ministry. And so those are the three main things I do. I do some other stuff as well, but those are my three main buckets of service, if you will.
Kevin, you are very entrepreneurial and you wear a lot of different hats here, Kevin.
Yeah, growing up in Cabrini, right, you had to figure out what God was giving you, put in your hand and say, how do I use this in multiple ways, right, to stretch. I'm sure you have that same story as well, though, so don't throw it all on me, brother.
Oh, my gosh. Hey, you know what? I realize my personality, I can't do one thing. I have to do multiple things. And that's just how you're wired. Some people just aren't wired like that, but some people thrive on it.
Yeah, I love it. I feel like I'm kind of in that space as well.
Yeah. Hey, Ruth, Kevin, let me ask you guys a question. Either one of you guys can answer is, what are opportunities at UR Chicago Alliance? How can people support? Not one, you could easily support it financially. That is always a given. But what are some other opportunities or people who excel or specialize in certain areas? How can they help what you guys are doing?
Go right ahead, Kevin.
Okay. Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. So so as you know, how we perform and reach our impact is we do a lot of community outreach. That's the only way you're going to make an impact in cross-cultural communities like the hoods that we try to impact. So we do a lot of outreach, and so so we usually do an open mic, right? And we're praying about doing that again. But the idea with open mic is you invite the community because, as you all know, if you start a business, you start an organization, and you just put a banner up and say, "Hey, come join, come support, come." You know, that's not usually how it's going to work, right? You have to go deep in the community and actually let them know you're a part of the community, and you're providing something that's of value to them, right? So going deep. So one is you can always volunteer at UR Chicago. We are always looking for volunteers, and a volunteer role could be a one-time serve where you help us with a graduation. So in our cohorts, the guys and gals, they go through 8.5-week program, right? And then at the end, there's a graduation, right? So you can volunteer with providing food or just kind of helping with service, checking in folks, sign-ins, doing security, all kind of things. So there's a number of ways you can volunteer. You can also become a mentor. As anybody that knows that runs a program, you cannot thrive or survive without volunteer mentors. And our mentors actually partner with leaders, program participants, to actually help them figure out career paths. They act as the language translator to corporate America. So some of these folks who had a job, you've had a job for a year, 5 years, 15 years. Some of our guys are coming into a job for the first time. And so they have some general questions, they have some concerns. And so when you start to build a relationship as a mentor, you're able to say, yeah, no, it's okay. He told you to pick up a broom. He's not being racist to you. That's part of the job when you're in there, right? So giving some practical help for our mentors as a volunteer. We do resume writing, mock interviews. We can always use folks to help make that transition in those areas. We also are doing the food drive, right, in Cabrini. And so we love to have volunteers come through. This is an easy on-ramp to mobilize the church, to disciple the church. So when volunteers come, I actually take them to a training, right, on what it looks like to do cross-cultural ministry. How do you help in the hood without hurting in the hood? And there, as you know, Tommy, if you go to Ethiopia, if you go to China, Shanghai, wherever, and you don't learn the language, you don't learn the culture, you're going to go over there and you're going to offend a lot of people. And it's the same thing in the hoods, in our communities. So these are tangible ways folks can get involved. We are always looking for financial monthly donors, like you said earlier, but giving one-time gifts, angel investors. There's a ton of ways that you can get involved with UR Chicago.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, Ruth, I mean, it's like, I was just studying Galatians where Paul says to the church at Galatia, become like me, for I became like you. And I realized that when I go and on behalf of Resource Global, I go to Jakarta, Singapore, Malaysia, Nairobi, even Austin, Texas, I have to be a student of the culture. And Americans don't always understand this. We think we're the leaders. We think we're the guys who call the shots. And we go in and we take over because they just don't know what's going on. But God has been there way before we even set foot. He has a plan for Cabrini Green, for the city of Chicago, for North Rogers Park. I have to learn to be a student and listen to people and be humble enough to say, Lord, what are you doing there? What can I learn? And how can I serve this city and this neighborhood well?
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey,
no, that's exactly right.
and Ruth, let me, for you, as a born and raised in Ohio, is that from what I remember?
No, I grew up in northern Illinois. So
Okay, northern Illinois. But you worked in Arkansas too, right?
I lived in Arkansas for 6 years. Yeah.
But you've been at Moody by Institute, everything like that. What have you learned as an individual by serving Cabrini Green?
Oh, a ton. I don't know if we have enough time to list all the things. Yeah, I mean, the people, the kids in Cabrini have taught me so much about just coming in a humble way and just observing them and just getting an understanding of the reason why they do different things. And just being able to see them for who they are and not through my perception of who I think they should be or who I think they are. And so, yeah, I mean, I was even just thinking about just the concept of in Cabrini, they have such a huge honor shame mindset. And that's completely different than the mindset that I grew up with. And I was actually talking with Kevin about this the other day. And just for me, just learning more about that honor shame mindset and how that drives, the way that they carry out their actions, how that drives gang killings and how that drives so many other things. And so for me, it's just been, taking a step back and just observing and seeing how they function, how they work. But then at the same time, how can I bring the truth of God into those situations? How can I help give them hope when they're completely hopeless because they don't see how anything will ever, anything good can ever come out of, such a shameful situation. And so, yes, I mean, they've taught me so many different things, but basically just how to observe and how to learn from them.
Got it. As a volunteer, Kevin just shared about some of the things ways for people to serve in terms of food drives, mentors, everything like that. How has being a volunteer and being involved in your Chicago Alliance really help you to grow in your spiritual life? And what are your advice for those who want to become volunteers or interested?
Yeah, I mean, I love the training that, Kevin's doing with When Helping Hurts. And it's really helped me grow and just understand more of God's heart and, kind of set aside my worldviews, my perceptions of things, and truly focus more on God and who God is. And so it's been really powerful.
You got it. Hey, Kevin, I'm glad you're reading When Helping Hurts with Brian Ficker. That's a great book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So our curriculum that we use when we walk our folks through the cohort is based on they created a workforce development. How can a church, when they see the poverty outside the doors, how can a church be mobilized to actually create a workforce development community that engages them in a Christ-centered way without hurting, right? Because for long, the narrative, right, we've only seen one narrative, right? When you come into these hoods, they're dangerous, they're savages, they're God-forsaken, right? And that's kind of been the narrative that's been told. But like you said earlier, God hasn't forsaken places. God has leaders. He has remnants of folks who are in the community that actually can help serve and love well and have been doing it and need the support of a church, right? They need that backing behind the church to actually accomplish their mission. So that curriculum is so solid.
And the argument I have also with Kevin is are you creating for-profit jobs that are creating sustainable living? I'm not saying creates a job that only creates $200 a month. That's nothing. Forget about it. But something that allows you to earn $40,000 to $50,000 in Chicago to really be able to then create a sustainable living where you're able to support your family during this period of time.
Amen. Now that's the heartbeat of our program, right? I know coming up, and you guys know, right? If you are working to, pay your bills and you're living from paycheck to paycheck, right? This is a rat race. You're in a cycle of hopelessness and poverty, right? And you do not see value in that. And so when we go out, we have an employer network that we go out and have a person team actually soliciting jobs, right? Going to companies and saying, hey, we are a faith-based organization. We have a clue to change the violence and impact the poverty in the city. Can you provide 5 to 10 jobs this year for our graduates, right? And it needs to be at a living wage. It needs to be felony friendly or background friendly, because a lot of our guys, they've only seen one way to earn and hustle for their family, and that's what they've done. And so a lot of these guys have backgrounds, but they're good kids, they're good girls and guys, and they just need opportunity. And so living wage job, it's kind of mandatory for us when we're reaching out to our employers. So that's also another way. I forgot to communicate that. If you are an employer, if you are influential in your company, you work in HR, we are looking for people to partner with to say, hey, can you provide a couple opportunities for a few people? Not just, it don't have to be a ton of people, but just 1 or 2 people at a living wage rate, and train our guys. They're open and learn. They've been verified. They've been drug tested, background checked, and they went through our program. We put our stamp of approval on them that they're ready to work.
You got it. Well, Kevin, Ruth, we're out of time, but thank you so much for just taking time out to talk. And I know on behalf of Mike Rolfus and Renew Chicago, they really enjoy partnering, and it has really been beneficial for them to really be able to partner with you all. So, hey, thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, tell Mike and those guys thank you, man. We really appreciate Rolfus.
For more information on Renew Chicago, go to renewchicago.city. That is renewchicago.city. On Facebook, go to @RenewChicago. And in the next couple of weeks, we're going to work on launching our Instagram. And so, guys, have a wonderful day, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys. Bye, Ruth.